My name's Emma, and I used to be a figure skating coach before my life took a completely different direction. I spent most of my days at the rink, either gliding on ice or teaching kids how to balance on their skates without falling. It was a regular Tuesday morning when I first met Jack. He was clearly out of his element, gripping the railing like it was his lifeline, while his niece Sophie, who was about 7, zipped around him, laughing. "Hey, need a hand?" I skated over to Jack, amused by his cautious stance. He looked up, relief all over his face. "Yeah, thanks. I'm Jack, and this is Sophie," he said, gesturing to his whirlwind of a niece who was now attempting a spin. "Emma." I introduced myself with a smile. "And don't worry, you're not the first adult here to look like they're auditioning for Bambi on ice." He chuckled, relaxing a bit. "That obvious, huh? I'm just trying to keep up with her." He nodded towards Sophie. "But I swear she's more at home here than I am in my office." We chatted as I gave him a few tips on skating without clinging to the sides. He picked it up quickly, maybe because he didn't want to embarrass himself in front of Sophie. Either way, it was fun watching him get the hang of it. "Uncle Jack, look," Sophie called out, doing a little jump. I laughed. "She's a natural. Ever thought of getting her into lessons?" Jack glanced at me, then back at Sophie, who was skating toward us. "I've thought about it. Do you give lessons?" "Sure do," I replied. "I teach kids her age all the time." She fit right in. He seemed to consider it as he watched Sophie join us, her face flushed with cold and excitement. "What do you think, kiddo? Want to learn some cool tricks?" Sophie's eyes lit up. "Yes, please, Uncle Jack." He nodded, looking back at me. "Guess we're signing up then." From that day, Jack started bringing Sophie to her lessons regularly. We talked more and more. He had a dry sense of humor that I liked. Sometimes he'd even lace up a pair of skates and try a few moves himself. One day, after the rink had emptied and it was just the two of us, he asked me out. It was straightforward, no fancy lines. Just a simple, "Want to grab dinner sometime?" That dinner led to many more, and before I knew it, we were inseparable. Life after marrying Jack settled into a comfortable rhythm faster than I expected. Moving out of my small apartment and into a house with him felt like the first real grown-up thing I'd ever done. We filled it with furniture, laughter, and eventually the cries and giggles of our kids. Jack's family was a big part of our lives. His mom, Linda, and dad, David, were over so often it felt like they lived with us half the time. Linda loved fussing over everything, from the garden to my cooking, which she praised even though I knew I wasn't a master chef. "You've got to teach me how to make this lasagna, Emma," she'd say with genuine enthusiasm as she helped herself to another hefty slice. "It's no secret recipe, Linda," I joked back. "Just follow the instructions on the box and add a pinch of love." She'd chuckle, wiping her mouth with a napkin. Jack's sister, Jessica, and her daughter, Sophie, were regulars too. Sophie was growing up so fast, and watching her play with my kids brought a peace and happiness that was hard to describe. One Sunday, while the kids sprawled on the living room floor with their coloring books and toys, Jessica and I sipped coffee in the kitchen. "You've made a nice life here, Emma," Jessica noted, her tone a mix of admiration and a hint of wistfulness. "I guess we did, huh?" I responded, leaning back in my chair. "It's noisy, messy, and chaotic, but it's ours." Jessica laughed, her voice echoing slightly in the kitchen. "That's family. Jack's really stepped up, hasn't he? Being a dad suits him." I smiled, thinking about how Jack had embraced fatherhood with surprising grace. "He's great with them, though he's been working so much lately." "Yeah, he mentioned the new project at work. Sounds like a beast," Jessica sympathized, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. Jack had been staying late more often, coming home after the kids were already asleep. I understood his job was demanding, especially now that he was the sole breadwinner since I quit working to raise the kids. That night, after the kids were in bed, and I was folding laundry, Jack came home. He looked exhausted, his suit rumpled and his hair a mess. "You look like you've been through a war," I said, half joking as I walked over to help him with his coat. Jack forced a smile, his eyes tired. Feels like it sometimes. These clients are driving me at the wall. We ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from knowing someone so well that words aren't always necessary. But underneath that comfort, a thread of worry nagged at me. Jack seemed to be pulling away, lost in his work. Later, as we lay in bed, I turned to him, the moonlight casting shadows across our room. "You okay? You've been really distant lately. Talk to me." Jack turned to face me, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I'm just tired, Emma. It's this project. It won't be like this forever, I promise." As I drifted off to sleep, I hoped he was right, that this was just a temporary wedge, and nothing more. I feared what it might mean if our little bubble of domestic bliss burst. When I found out I was pregnant with our third child, it was a mix of joy and apprehension. I told Jack the news one evening after he came home late, looking as weary as ever. "Jack, I have something to tell you." "I'm pregnant," I said, my voice filled with excitement and nervousness. He looked up, surprise etching his face before it softened into a smile. "Really? Wow, that's great, Emma," he said, and for a moment he seemed genuinely happy, the tired lines around his eyes smoothing out. But the smile didn't reach his eyes, and he sank into the chair as if the weight of another responsibility was too much to bear. "It's wonderful news," I continued, trying to gauge his reaction. "But Jack, I'm going to need you more at home. With 3 kids, it's going to be a lot." Jack's face changed then, the brief joy fading as reality set in. "More at home, Emma. You know my work's crazy right now. How am I supposed to?" "I know, but it's our family, Jack. They're your kids too," I interrupted, feeling a sting of frustration. "I do my part, Emma," he snapped back, his voice rising. "I work all day to provide for us. I need to rest, not come home to more work and screaming kids." I swallowed hard as he walked away, feeling more alone than ever. His words hurt, but I tried to shake it off, telling myself he was just stressed. The months that followed were tough. As my belly grew, so did the distance between Jack and me. He started using work as an excuse to stay away, coming home only to lock himself in his office or leaving before dawn for so-called business trips. When our third child, Cho, was born, I hoped it might bring us back together, that seeing her tiny face would remind Jack of what was important, but it only seemed to push him further away. He barely looked at Chloe, and when he did, it was with a hollow kind of detachment. "Jack, won't you hold her?" I asked one evening when he was actually home. I held Chloe out to him, her little eyes blinking sleepily. Jack glanced at her, then back at his phone. "I've got to take this call," he said, turning away. It felt like a punch to the gut. I nodded, saying nothing, and turned back to Chloe, whispering apologies into her soft hair. Days turned into weeks, and Jack's absences grew longer. When he was home, he seemed irritated by the smallest noise, and I felt like I was constantly smoothing things over, keeping the kids quiet, keeping the house calm, while my own heart was anything but. One day, as the evening wound down, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Hesitating for a moment, I answered it while trying to soothe the fussy Chloe after her nap. "Mrs. Thompson," a deep voice inquired on the other end, sounding formal and serious. "Yes, this is she. How can I help you?" I replied. "This is Mark Spencer, the director at your husband's company. I'm sorry to disturb you, but we've been trying to reach Jack all day. We urgently need him back at the office." A cold chill ran down my spine. "Oh, he's on a business trip right now and won't be back until next week," I responded, trying to keep my voice steady despite the sudden thump of my heart. "That's impossible, Mrs. Thompson," Paul said, sounding confused and a bit impatient. "We don't have him down for any business trips. In fact, he took personal leave, saying he needed to help at home with the new baby." My hand tightened around the phone. "There must be some mistake," I stammered. "He left for a trip a few days ago." There was a pause, then Paul spoke again, his voice softer. "I see. If you do hear from him, please have him contact me directly. It's urgent." I hung up, the silence in the room now deafening. Jack's lies were unraveling faster than I could keep up. He wasn't on any business trip. He'd been lying for who knows how long. The pain of reanimation was sharp and almost physical. I tried to focus on the rest of the day, but my mind was spinning with dark, tangled thoughts. When Jack finally came home later that week, acting like nothing was wrong, I felt sick watching him. He kissed me on the forehead and complained about the long flight he'd supposedly just endured. I said nothing about the call from his director, instead, choosing to watch and wait. The next day, as Jack took a long shower, I noticed his phone lying on the dresser. It wasn't password protected. My hand shook as I picked it up and started going through his messages. Right in front of me were dozens of texts and photos. Not just any photos, but intimate ones with his secretary, a young woman named Olivia. They spoke of meetings when he was supposedly working late and little getaways during his so-called business trips. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My hands automatically forwarded the messages and photos to my email. I needed proof. After making sure there were no traces of what I'd done, I put his phone back exactly where he'd left it. Jack came out of the shower, relaxed and oblivious to the storm raging inside me. He rambled on about his day, complained about being tired, and how he needed a quiet evening. "Rough day," I managed to ask, keeping my voice neutral. "Yeah, you know how it is. Non-stop action," he replied, collapsing on the sofa and flipping through the channels. I just nodded, feeling numb. After making sure the kids were settled in their beds, I sat at the dining table, long after Jack went to bed, staring at the empty chairs around me. My life as I knew it was falling apart. Seeing Jack every day, knowing what I knew, felt like swallowing poison. My heart burned with silent rage, yet I kept smiling, holding my plans close to my chest. I was determined to expose his betrayal and lies in front of everyone we cared about. With my birthday fast approaching, I knew it would be the perfect stage to reveal the truth. I started planning the party with a single focus, sending out invitations to all our family and friends and rehearsing my speech late at night when the house was quiet. Jack has been living a lie, I practiced saying to my reflection, my voice steady. And we've all been his audience. Jack seemed oblivious to my inner turmoil. He even helped with the party preparations, suggesting decorations and discussing the menu. The cruel irony of his involvement wasn't lost on me. The day before my birthday, everything was set. The decorations were up, the food was ordered, and my speech was burned into my mind. That's when Jack dropped his bombshell. "I've got to head out to the airport tonight. Urgent business in Chicago that can't wait. I'll be gone for 2 weeks," Jack announced casually over dinner, as if he were merely stepping out for a quick errand. My fork clattered to my plate. "But my birthday is Jackaro. You can't be serious." Jack didn't meet my eyes. "I'm really sorry, Emma. It's this new client, a big opportunity I can't pass up." I knew better. There was no client, no business trip. It was her, his mistress. "Oh, right, work," I said, the word bitter on my tongue. "I'll make it up to you, Emma. We'll celebrate when I get back, okay?" He smiled at me, but I didn't return it. As he walked away, my thoughts raced. This was it, the moment where I could have brought everything crashing down around him. But he was leaving, and my plans for a public confrontation were ruined. I watched from the window as he drove away, my heart a mix of fury and despair. My birthday would still come, and though my plans were foiled for now, this wasn't the end. I would find another way, a better moment to reveal the truth. The morning after Jack left was the day of my birthday party. The house quickly filled with family and the warm chatter of familiar voices. My parents were the first to arrive, followed closely by Jack's parents, his sister Jessica, and her daughter Sophie. They came bearing gifts and smiles, ready to celebrate. As the children played in the background, my mother-in-law Margaret looked around, her expression puzzled. "Where's Jack? Isn't he joining us for your birthday, Emma? I hesitated, a lump forming in my throat. I had planned this moment and rehearsed the words, but facing it head-on felt overwhelming. Actually, can we gather in the living room? There's something important I need to discuss with all of you, I managed to say, my voice steady. Curious and somewhat concerned, everyone moved to the living room, settling into the sofas and armchairs. I asked Sophie to watch over the younger kids, ensuring they were occupied and away from what was about to be an adult conversation. Once everyone was seated, I took a deep breath, holding on to the back of the couch for support. Margaret's eyes were fixed on me, filled with worry. Emma, what's wrong? Where's our son? I pulled out my phone, opening the gallery where I'd saved the evidence of Jack's infidelity. There's no easy way to say this, but Jack hasn't been honest with us. I began, my voice clear despite the shaking of my hands. I turned the screen to face them, showing a photo of Jack with his mistress, their intimacy undeniable. A gasp echoed through the room, most audibly from Margaret and David, Jack's parents. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. For years now, Jack has been distant, more involved with her than with his own family. I continued, the words tasting bitter. He told me he was on a business trip yesterday, on the eve of my birthday, but that was a lie. He's with her right now. The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with betrayal and disbelief. Margaret's face crumbled, tears welling up in her eyes. David's jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists. Margaret reached out, taking my hand. Oh, Emma, how long have you known? Only a few days, I admitted. I found out just before he left. I'm sorry to drop this on all of you like this, but I didn't know what else to do. David stood up abruptly, pacing a few steps before turning to face me. He's my son, but I can't condone this, not when he's hurt you and the kids like this. What are you planning to do, Emma? My resolve hardened, fueled by their support. I'm planning to file for divorce. I can't be with someone who has so little regard for his family. The room fell silent as everyone processed the bombshell I had just dropped. Then, one by one, they began to express their support. If that's your decision, you have our full support, Emma. You and the kids are our family too, David said firmly, his voice rough with emotion. Margaret squeezed my hand tighter. Whatever you need, we're here for you. I'm so sorry our son caused you this pain. Jessica came over and hugged me. We're with you, Emma, all the way. Jack needs to answer for this. I was grateful for their support, but I voiced a concern that had been gnawing at me. I don't know what I'm going to do next, I admitted. I can't stay in this house. It's too much. But I've got nowhere to go with the kids. My parents immediately offered to take us in. You and the kids can come back home, my dad said, his voice steady and reassuring. But before I could respond, David spoke up. Actually, the house you're living in now, David started, his tone serious. It's under my name. I think it's best if we sell it. There's a house near ours that's just come on the market. It would be perfect for you and the kids. The room paused, everyone processing David's words. My mother-in-law clapped her hands, a smile spreading across her face. Oh, that would be wonderful. Having the grandchildren close by and Emma too. It would mean the world to us. The decision was made quickly after that. David and Margaret moved forward with selling the house. It was a whirlwind, and before I knew it, they had not only sold it but also purchased the new home near them. The efficiency and support from Jack's family were overwhelming in the best way possible. The move was a flurry of activity. Boxes were packed, furniture moved, and my life was repacked into a new setting with incredible speed. My parents, David, Margaret, and Jessica were all hands on deck, making the transition as smooth as possible. During these days of setting up our new home, I finally dealt with the last piece of my old life with Jack. I gathered all his belongings, which weren't many since he'd taken most with him on his supposed business trip. With the help of my father, I shipped everything to Jack's office. Included in the boxes was a letter, not just to him but to his director. I detailed everything from the affair to the lies about his business trips. That night, after the kids had gone to bed in their new rooms, I stepped out onto the small porch of our new house. The air was cool, the sky clear and full of stars. David came outside to join me. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice gentle. "I'm okay," I said, looking out into the night. "Actually, I'm more than okay. I feel free." David nodded, understanding. "Good. You deserve to be happy, Emma. All of you do." "We will be," I replied, a newfound resolve strengthening within me. "We're going to be just fine." And as we stood there, the quiet night around us, I believed it. With the support of my family and the promise of new beginnings, I was ready to face whatever came next. I wasn't just surviving, I was ready to thrive. The real drama unfolded when Jack returned from his business trip. He went straight to our old house, expecting everything to be as he left it. I heard about what happened next from Jessica, who heard it from a neighbor. Jack tried to unlock the door, but of course the keys didn't work. New locks. He started pounding on the door, loud enough to startle the new tenants who had just moved in. Confused and annoyed, the man who opened the door was met with Jack's bewildered and angry face. "Where's Emma? What the hell are you doing in my house?" Jack demanded, his voice booming. The new tenant, taken aback by Jack's aggression, threatened to call the cops. Flustered and fuming, Jack pulled out his phone and dialed my number. I answered, knowing this call was inevitable. "What the hell, Emma? Why can't I get into the house? Who are those people?" Jack's voice was loud and frantic over the phone. I replied calmly, each word deliberate and clear. "I sold the house, Jack, and I'm not going to tell you where we are now. You should probably go stay with your mistress." The line went silent for a moment before he erupted again, cursing and demanding explanations. But I had said what I needed to, and I hung up. My heart pounded, but my resolve was steady. Jack, lost and desperate, went to his parents' house next. But David and Margaret were firm. They had already chosen their stand. When Jack showed up at their doorstep hoping for solace or a place to stay, David met him at the door. "We can't support you in this, Jack. What you did to Emma and the kids were ashamed." David told him, his disappointment heavy in his voice. Jack lost it then, yelling about being their son and how they couldn't just turn him away. But David was adamant, the door closing on Jack's pleas and curses. Back at work, things didn't go any smoother for Jack. I got the details from my friend Amy, who works in HR at Jack's company. The director had called him in first thing, laying down the consequences of his actions, not just the affair but the misuse of company time and resources. Jack was transferred to another branch effective immediately. His secretary was fired, the company keen to wash its hands clean of any part in Jack's personal mess. Jack was livid, lashing out as he packed his things, kicking boxes and throwing papers. It was a low point for him, but for me it was a strange kind of closure. I filed for divorce shortly after, citing his infidelity. I included the evidence I had gathered, making sure my case was ironclad. I wasn't vengeful, but I needed to secure a future for our children. The court proceedings were swift, thanks to the overwhelming evidence and Jack's somewhat tarnished reputation. In the aftermath, I turned back to the one thing that always brought me peace: figure skating. I got a job teaching at a local rink, morning sessions only, leaving my afternoons and evenings free to be with my kids. Life now is a far cry from where I was just a few months ago. The kids are thriving, closer to their grandparents, who spoil them with love and toys. My evenings are filled with homework, laughter, and the occasional movie night. It's simple, but it's ours.